I define myself as black. Anything else to me was blasphemy. It was an expression of self-hatred towards your own African ancestry. And it wasn't until I was an adult that I actually started to challenge that.
It's only been 50 years since it was illegal for people that were black and white to be married.
Today, the United States Supreme Court handed down a decision. Richard and Mildred Loving have won the right to be man and wife, father and mother in the state of Virginia. Anti-miscegenation laws have been declared illegal not only in Virginia, but in all 16 states that have held such statutes.
It is not sheer happenstance that Loving comes so late in the civil rights movement.
So the '64 Civil Rights Act dismantles segregation in public accommodations. The '65 Voting Rights Act, which in many ways instantiates citizenship for people of color. You might think that, with those two things, the most important legal barriers would have fallen. But ultimately, until you can address miscegenation, you won't get there.
It was the fear of contamination of white blood, white womanhood being defiled, that drove so much of the racial violence in this country. My grandmother was raised on a sharecropping farm in Mississippi, and black men were killed for being with white women. Even the fears about school segregation were sexual fears, that if you put white and black kids in the classroom together, that they may come to like each other and form a relationship and have children.
I grew up in the South in the 70s, not just the South. I grew up in Virginia within 5 years of the Loving v. Virginia decision.
My dad is white and Australian, and my mom is black and Cuban. And they met in the United States in 1958.
My parents started dating junior or senior year of high school, and they got married pretty young. 2 years after Loving, it was 1969.
My birth mother and my birth father were not in a loving relationship. It was much more about rebellion and rebelliousness for my birth mother.
My mother was involved in Vietnam protests. They started protesting together, and eventually they got married and had me.
My parents met around 1978, 79 at Morgan State University, which is a historically black college or university in Baltimore. When my mom enrolled, she had no idea that that was a black school. My dad at the time was the assistant band director, and so they met in the band.
My parents met in the military. My mother is a French immigrant, and my father's the black man from Alabama who joined the military, and they both ended up in Panama, and a star was born.
I've heard a lot of people talk about that generation as the Loving generation. I consider myself to be part of that generation, born in the early 1970s. And since then, the numbers have grown exponentially. We also did some research on this at the Census Bureau and found not everyone who may have a multiracial heritage self-identifies as multiracial.
I grew up in the 70s in Philly, and when you had a black parent and a white parent, you were black. There wasn't really a choice kind of seen at that time. I mean, there's people in my family over hundreds of years who looked like I did, and they were black, and some of them were slaves. So there was never a question about who I was racially.
I identify as black. My father didn't really give me any options not to. I remember him telling me very plainly, your mother is white, you are not. And making sure that I was clear, like acknowledge your mother, always acknowledge your mother. Your mother's a white woman. Don't ever forget your mom. But you're a black boy, and you'll be a black man one day.
I was not ever raised as an interracial child. That isn't even an identity I acknowledged as existing. I was a black kid with a white mom.
There was no such thing as mixed. We came from a time where being black was to some degree a political act. That actually my kid being black, it's important that we call that kid black. For my parents, it was important that I was black.
My father is Jewish, my mother is black. As long as, the world has a problem with Jews and with blacks, I'm gonna make it a point to be both.
You have who you think you are. You have the larger community, how that larger community sees you, who you are. And then you have the legal test case of who you are. When all three of those things are working in the same direction, everything is fine, everything is chill. Like if you're a mixed person who looks black and everybody thinks you're black and you think you're black, there's no conflict there. The problem is when one of those things is off.
My mom is white The man she married is white. I was never, ever told I was black by my mother. I asked her many times, and I got a range of answers. My birth father was Native American, Puerto Rican, because somehow that is less of a stigma than being black. So I don't identify as black. I identify as mixed race.
At the end of high school, when I was really thinking through like college admissions, I was like, should I check biracial? Should I take black and white? And that was really because I was very worried that I was kind of lying in my diversity. Was me having a white mom kind of some type of like hidden lie that I was saying if I were black?
I think other people who identify as mixed, I hear them sometimes say, well, I don't want to dismiss or diminish my white parent. I think my father would have thought that was the craziest thing if I had said that to him.
I didn't learn about kind of a larger mixed identity until the '92 census, when people were talking about the idea of knocking other boxes on the census, and it was a big deal.
What really led to the changes in the 1990s was an outgrowth of advocacy and discussions about the need for recognition of people who reported more than one race.
The weird thing about all this is that there have always been mixed people.
You can look at census going back to the 1800s. Certain black people were being listed as mulatto even back then.
The significance of boxes on the census form is that it presents some validity and some reality to lived experiences that people have. Really only about 50 years ago, the census moved from looking at people and determining what race they were to asking people to self-identify their race or their ethnicity.
So when that happened with the census, that's when I started thinking about things differently as far as what it was to be black and what it was to be mixed. I was at a conference, and I was talking about this thing of people wanting to prove that you're black enough. And all these people started agreeing with me, like, and telling their own stories of when it happened to them. And then I looked around, there was like 7 other people, and I realized they were all mixed. It was really weird because I realized I had never been in a group of mixed people before. And that kind of changed everything. Like after that, I kind of came out of the closet as a mixed person, which like looking at me should be obvious, but was still like really upsetting to people. You know, friends I had didn't understand and thought that I was, you know, becoming like a sellout, running off into the desert and deciding I'm white.
People who have black and white parentage can claim both sides of their heritage. Is our right to do that. But also through history, particularly black people who had a white father were advantaged over other black people. And then there's this attempt to kind of rewrite history. Now, is Frederick Douglass black or is he biracial? Was Harriet Tubman black or is she biracial?
It's difficult to acknowledge that you are not, you know, just the descendant of the slave who was kidnapped in West Africa and brought to America. You're also the descendant of the white person who kidnapped you. So, like, how complicated is that?
The only reason I can think of choosing biracial is to have that kind of white adjacency known to people. And I don't feel the need to have that known to people.
Whatever group I claim is going to benefit, because in some ways I'm saying, yeah, your agenda is important. I am a voice supporting that agenda, whether it be white or black.
My power is in choosing and saying that this is who I am, that I reject. To me, claiming my blackness is rejecting white supremacy. It is not claiming the privilege that I could. It is not desiring to be closer to that which is in power.